All right, so this one is not one parable. This one is three in one, but I like the way it begins. And the thing that unites it all, it's all about the lost, right? It's about lost things getting found. And I think it's interesting the setting, right? I love when the Bible says this. It says, now the tax collectors and sinners, in quotes. So
Yes.
Jesus is hanging out with the less reputable. And then at the same time, the Pharisees are right there, kind of like confused by this whole setting. So it's Jesus sitting with the people your mama told you not to sit with, and the supposed good people kind of take issue with this. And so that's the setting for these three parables.
It's a very interesting collection of people, I think, because on one side you have the tax collectors and the sinners who are lost, and they probably know it because they're the outcasts, they're the outsiders. Then you have the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who are lost and don't know it.
It's like
they're
the setting
just
of a
as lost.
musical,
Yes,
Sarah,
it
right?
really
You got the good and the bad right there.
Oh, yeah. And I love that Jesus is just speaking directly to the Pharisees and teachers of the law, even though they might not know it at the time, because it says that he speaks directly to them and just wanting to show them, hey, like, you're just as lost as those people that you say, like, how dare Jesus hang out with the tax collectors and the sinners? They are appalled that they would even be in the same vicinity as Jesus. But I love that Jesus really sets this up and saying, like, how should we react when something is lost and that we finally find it? He's really making this awesome point with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, like, hey, here are these people that are lost that are now found in me. You should be celebrating and rejoicing because they're now found. I think we all think of how fear-inducing it can be when we lose something, not just like the remote, because that's just an inconvenience.
That's aggravating.
That's just aggravating.
I gotcha.
But like you have this feeling of, oh no, when you lose something, and you guys don't know this story, but it applies. So when I was out of the country, we were actually traveling from country to country. We were at the train station like 10 minutes before our train was about to leave. And again, like going from country to country. So you would need a passport, right?
That's
In your
helpful.
wallet. So I'm sitting there at the station and I think, where's my bag? And I look through my backpack and I realize that I do not have my small purse that contains my passport and my wallet and everything important for this trip. And of course, I freak out. And again, 10 minutes before our train's about to leave, and that panic just sets in of like, I have to find this. And so my dad and I like run all over the place. We end up eventually finding it at the police station. Some awesome guy ended up turning it in because he found it sitting on a bench. And it was just that moment of like, what am I going to do? So we all know that feeling of something being lost and how like awesome it can be when I finally found my purse with all of my stuff in it. And so Jesus is saying like, when you find those things, like yes, my wallet and my passport are very important, but how much more should we rejoice when a loved one is lost and is found? And it's really cool how he like increases the desperation and the value over these three parables with like an animal and then money and then the loved one. And so he's just saying like, how much more should we rejoice when something that is lost is
I
found?
love the intensity of that, Sarah, because at that moment, your dad wasn't concerned about his passport that was not lost.
No, he was concerned about mine.
Everybody was happy, like, oh my gosh, like, we're going to be okay with that. Like, that's super. So, Derek, as we think about these three things, take us into the stories. These all come from Luke chapter 15. It's one long narrative. Kind of take us in.
Yeah, so I think Jesus uses three different examples to try to bring his point home. The first one, he talks about somebody that has 100 sheep and one goes missing. And so they drop everything to go and find this one sheep. And after he's found the sheep, throws it on his shoulders, carries it home, is rejoicing, asking friends and family to come and celebrate with him. The second one is about a lady that had 10 apparently really special coins to her. And so she has all 10 coins until she doesn't, and she loses one. And so she's going through the house, lighting a lantern, trying to find this coin, flipping over everything, and then she finds it. And then she calls everyone she knows to come and celebrate because her coin has been found. And then the third example is probably maybe the most well-known, talking about the prodigal son, or as Brandon put on our notes, like the two lost sons, as we'll get into here in a moment. But pretty much that this son is asking his dad for his inheritance now, and his dad gives it to him, and he goes away and kind of squanders all of it, and realizes that after he's kind of, sitting with pigs and eating what pigs eat, realizes that even the servants in his dad's home are treated better than he is. And so he returns home. his dad, while his son was still a long way off, literally goes and runs towards him and embraces him and throws a celebration. And yet, the one son that was left at home is still a little bitter over the acceptance that the father has for the son that returned home.
And I like that because the setting matters on this one, Derek, because the setting is you have all the sinners and the lost sitting with Jesus, right, as equals.
Yeah.
And you have all the religious elite just joining in and watching it, and they don't realize who is who in that parable. So really, he's talking straight at them.
Yeah, and it speaks to the power of these parables, right? Like, especially the parable of the prodigal son, that you can look at that parable and see it from so many different angles, right? That you can see yourself as the lost son. You can see yourself as the lost coin. And originally, this parable is intended to strike at the older brothers.
Yeah.
Because that's who Jesus is talking to in the room, these people who cannot celebrate the grace of God as it's being poured out on the tax collectors and the sinners of their day. And I think that's like what we need to keep in mind as we read these stories, that these three stories, each of them contains the language of celebration, right? Like, we found what was lost, and we have to celebrate over it. We have to be excited about it. And, there's a really interesting picture in Luke 15:25 that where the older son is outside of the party. Like, he refuses to come in and celebrate his brother's return. And it says that he hears the sound of music and dancing in the house, is what the NLT says. But the word that is translated as music is the Greek word from which we get the word symphony. That he hears this symphony and he doesn't want to be a part of it. And I think that's a very challenging picture for us when we think about how other people receive grace. Yeah. Is like, grace is God's symphony. Grace is what God is pouring out on the world. And if we don't celebrate that, if we're not a part of that, then we are standing outside the party. And I think that's just a very challenging picture, not just for not just for the religious leaders, but for us. And it's interesting that this story ends it's open-ended, right? There's not an ending that tells us, well, did the older son come back? Did he come into the party? And I think that's on purpose. Like, I think Jesus wants them to wrestle with that and say, now, what sort of older son are you going to be? Are you going to be the one who hears what the Father has to say? Are you going to be the one who hears the Father's symphony of grace and runs towards it to celebrate? Or are you going to stand outside and just snipe at the people who are going in?
Yeah, you can't help but listen to this and be challenged by it, because I want to talk about why we all are tempted to respond like that second son, which is to not see and experience other people's forgiveness in the same way our own. And so, when I was writing this down, I was going through each parable, and as I wrote this one down, this one's all about your attitude to God's grace that he gives to others. It's all about our heartbeat with it. And I was trying to think through why I would struggle with that. And I think what it comes down to is, are you Stephen, are you guys, are you aware of just how much grace God has given you? Yeah. Because if you are aware of that, it's so much easier to celebrate the other person, right? Yeah. I noticed this a little bit. I'm not a fast runner. I'm a very slow runner. But I noticed that the faster runners, it's harder sometimes to celebrate someone else's time if it's creeping up faster than yours. But when you're slow, and you're never going to be fast, when someone just finishes a marathon, you're like, way to go. Like, you finished. Like, I can celebrate with you because I know how hard and difficult that is. But if we sometimes get comparison mode, it's harder to do that. So as you guys think about that through a spiritual context, what is it for you when you think about other people's grace? Like, how do you struggle with it? But also, how do you kind of keep your heart in check?
Oh, man, that's a good question. Like, I think one of the reasons why we get so backwards on it, and I think about my own life here, is that we live in a world where resources are finite, right? Where stuff runs out.
That's good.
Where, like, if you get some money, well, that means I have less money. Or if you get if you get a bigger piece of the pie, that means I get less of the pie. And I think we approach grace that way sometimes, is to be like, well, if this person gets more grace, then that means there's going to be less for me. But God's grace is not a finite resource, right? It is infinite. It's never going to run out. That means that the more other people get, and the more I see that, the more I should celebrate that, hey, there is more grace to go around.
You're not going to exhaust it. That's a great point. Yeah, you kind of hoard because you think there's less. What about you guys?
Yeah, I would say that you have to have the right perspective of just how sinful you are. You know, and I think that's what he was getting at with these Pharisees, because I think, you know, especially those of us who've grown up in church and, you know, are really good at putting on the church mask, like we can act like we don't need grace because we're doing good. And then when we actually realize, like, oh, just how sinful we are, then that grace becomes much more like we fall in love with Jesus more because we see his grace and we see the love that God has given us. And I think that's a good reminder for me, too, because I think we can just get so wrapped up in, like, doing good things for God, but forgetting, like, how sinful we are in that grace piece, too. Because it's not just by our own works, right? Like that, we are saved by grace. Like we are saved from our sin. And I think it's just coming face to face with how sinful we are, which is not fun, but it's necessary because you have to understand that. And then you can extend that grace to other people and celebrate when other people are found too.
I think the heart of the issue is pride, right? Is that, you know, I think a lot of times we're so feelings based on a lot of things anyway. I think as a culture that, hey, if this is still bothering me or making me upset, then I'm going to cancel that person or eliminate that person or whatever that looks like. And, you know, but at the end of the day, it's pride, right? It's forgetting who we are, like the same sacrifice that Jesus had for us is the same sacrifice for every other person that we think is so awful. And so we have this completely messed up viewpoint on who we are compared to other people. Either, you know, you think that you're a horrible person or you think you're an amazing person. There's pridefulness in both of those. And it's tough, you know, but again, that's the journey. I think that's the journey. I don't think we ever get to a place where we've perfected this in our life, but it's the challenge that's always in front of us.
Yeah, I'm continually reminded in this, Jesus is overwhelmingly concerned with what's happening inside who we are in here and our attitude, so much more than what we present on the outside. And what we may present on the outside may look one way, but who we are on the inside, that's the only thing that actually matters.
Thank you for joining us today as part of our Parables Bible study. We really hope that talking through Jesus' key teachings from the Bible really benefited you. You know, more than anything else, we would love to be able to help you take some next steps and be engaged with all that's happening with Southeast Christian Church and our online ministry. You can always text the words SC Online to 733-733 for all the ways to take that next step. Send us an email or definitely visit our website. But we're glad that you're a part of this. Join in and be a part of what's happening.